The darkness of space suddenly filled with light as 200 massive ships appeared above the alien world. Each ship stretched 15 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide, their gray metal hulls gleaming under the light of the systems. Twin suns. The human fleet had arrived at Zephyria Prime, and they had come for war. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the USS Defiance, watching the planet slowly rotate beneath them. The world looked peaceful from this distance, its purple oceans and silver continents showing no signs of the violence that had brought humanity here. But Jake knew better than to trust appearances. 3 months ago, this same peaceful world had launched ships that turned human colonies into burning graveyards. "Sir, all carriers are reporting ready status," said Captain Lisa Bennett, walking up to stand beside him. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and steady green eyes that had seen too much combat. "The Zephyrian defense grid is powering up, but their ships are keeping their distance." Jake nodded without taking his eyes off the planet. 200. Supercarriers represented the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Each ship carried 5,000 crew members, 300 fighter craft, and enough weapons to reduce a city to ash. The sight should have filled him with confidence, but all he could think about were the faces of the dead colonists he had seen in the intelligence reports. "Communication from the Zephyrian fleet, Admiral," announced Communications Officer Danny Price from his station. The young man's voice carried a slight tremor that he tried to hide. "They're demanding we withdraw immediately." "Open a channel," Jake ordered, full visual. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Zephyrian warship. The alien commander was tall and thin, his skin translucent like polished crystal. 4 arms extended from his torso, each ending in hands with too many fingers. His face was angular and sharp, with large black eyes that seemed to look right through the humans watching him. "I am Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Space Force," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly across the void between their ships. "We demand an immediate audience with Empress Valana. Humanity seeks justice for the unprovoked massacre of our people." The Zephyrian commander's mandibles clicked together in what Jake had learned was their equivalent of laughter. "The Empress does not negotiate with primitives. Your pathetic fleet will be swept aside like space dust." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had expected this response, but hearing it still made his blood boil. "Then she have to sweep aside 200 of our finest warships. Each one carries enough firepower to crack a moon. Tell her we're waiting." The alien's black eyes narrowed. "You dare threaten the Eternal Empire? We have conquered 17 star systems while your species was still learning to make fire. Leave now, or we will add your bones to the monument of failed civilizations." "We're not leaving," Jake replied calmly. "Not until we get answers for what happened at New Austin, New Denver, and New Phoenix. Your Empress ordered the deaths of 3 million innocent people. That debt will be paid." The Zephyrian commander's crystal skin began to glow with an angry red light. "So be it, mammals. Your extinction begins now." The channel closed, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Jake turned to face his crew, seeing the mix of fear and determination in their eyes. Most of them were young, born after humanity had first reached the stars. They had grown up believing that the galaxy was vast enough for everyone to coexist peacefully. The attack on the Outer Rim colonies had shattered that illusion forever. "All ships, battle stations," Jake ordered. "Deploy fighter screens and charge all weapon systems. Today we show the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender, and we don't forget." Throughout the massive fleet, alarms began to sound as 2 million crew members prepared for the largest space battle in human history. Fighter pilots ran to their craft while gunners took their positions at the massive rail cannons that could punch through a kilometer of solid steel. Medical teams prepared for casualties and engineers checked every system twice. Dr. Helen Carter, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, approached Jake with her tablet computer. She was a small woman with gray hair and intelligent blue eyes that missed nothing. "Admiral, I've been monitoring their communications. The Zephyrians are using quantum entanglement networks. It's like they're all connected mentally. Hive mind?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. More sophisticated than that, Helen explained. Each individual maintains their own consciousness, but they can share thoughts and coordinate perfectly. The Empress can literally see through the eyes of every soldier in her fleet and control their actions if needed. Jake studied the tactical display showing thousands of Zephyrian ships forming complex patterns around their world. That explains how they coordinate so well. Can we disrupt it? Maybe, Helen said carefully. The new neural disruptors we developed after the Proxima incident might work, but we'd need to get close to their command ship. Very close. On the main screen, the Zephyrian fleet began moving toward them. Their ships were beautiful in a deadly way, made of the same crystal material as their occupants. They moved like a school of fish, each vessel perfectly synchronized with the others. Energy weapons began to charge along their hulls, creating patterns of light that would have been stunning if they weren't so terrifying. Incoming transmission from the planet's surface, Danny announced. It's the Empress herself. The screen changed to show the interior of what could only be described as a palace made of living crystal. The walls pulsed with soft bioluminescent light, and the air seemed to shimmer with energy. In the center of the vast chamber sat a throne that appeared to be grown rather than built, its surface covered in neural interfaces that glowed with the same light as the walls. Empress. Velana herself was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. She was larger than her soldiers, standing at least 3 meters tall, with skin that shifted between different shades of crystal. Her 4 arms ended in hands that could have crushed a human skull, and her black eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had ruled for centuries. So, she said, her voice resonating through some kind of bioacoustic system, the primitive mammals have finally grown bold enough to challenge me directly. I am Velana, the eternal Empress of 17 star systems, conqueror of the Andorian collective, destroyer of the Plasma Nebula pirates. I have ruled for 300 of your years, and I will rule for 300 more. Jake stepped forward, making sure she could see him clearly. Your Majesty, I'm Admiral Jake Morrison. 3 months ago, your forces attacked and destroyed 3 human colonies without warning or provocation. Millions of innocent people died. We're here to demand justice. Velana's laugh was like breaking glass. Justice? You speak of justice to me? I'm justice in this galaxy. Your colonies were expanding into space that belongs to the Eternal Empire. We simply reminded you of your place. Our place? Jake's voice remained steady despite the rage building in his chest. And what place is that? Beneath us, Velana replied without hesitation. Your species crawled from the mud of a single world barely 2 centuries ago. We have mastered faster-than-light travel, quantum manipulation, and bioneural networks. You are insects pretending to be equals. Jake felt the eyes of his crew on him, waiting for his response. He thought of the children's playgrounds turned to radioactive craters, of the families who had been vaporized while they slept, of the 3 million voices that would never speak again. Perhaps, he said quietly. But we're insects with 200 supercarriers and a very long memory. Last chance, Your Majesty. Surrender the commanders who ordered the attack and pay reparations for the damage. Otherwise, we'll take what we came for. Velana's crystal skin began to pulse with angry red light. You dare threaten me, in my own system? She rose from her throne, her full height now visible. I will crush your pathetic fleet and mount your skull on my wall as a reminder to other species who forget their place. Then we have nothing more to discuss, Jake said. He nodded to Danny, who closed the channel. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing the fear and determination in their faces. They were about to face an enemy that had conquered 17 star systems, led by an Empress who had never known defeat. All ships, Jake announced over the fleet communication system. This is Admiral Morrison. In 1 hour, we will engage the Zephyrian fleet. Today we fight not just for justice, but for the future of humanity in this galaxy. Show them that we don't bow to tyrants, no matter how powerful they think they are. The response from 200 ships was immediate and overwhelming. 2 million human voices shouted their defiance across the void, their battle cry echoing through space itself. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that some species couldn't be intimidated, no matter how ancient or powerful their enemies might be. Deep within the crystalline spires of the Imperial Palace, Empress Vellana paced back and forth in front of the massive viewing screens that showed the human fleet. Her translucent skin pulsed with angry crimson patterns, and her forearms gestured wildly as she addressed the War Council gathered around her throne. The bioacoustic walls of the chamber amplified her voice, making it resonate through the living crystal structure like thunder. "How dare these mammals threaten me and my own system?" she shrieked, her voice carrying a harmonic quality that made the very air vibrate. "I am Vellana, the eternal conqueror of 17 star systems. I have ruled for 3 centuries and crushed civilizations that your ancestors never dreamed existed." The War Council stood in perfect silence, their crystal forms reflecting the angry red light emanating from their Empress. Each member had served her for decades, some for over a century, and they knew better than to speak when she was in this state. The neural connections that linked them to her consciousness carried the full weight of her rage, making it impossible for them to think clearly. General Kex, her most trusted military advisor, took a careful step forward. His crystal skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated decades of combat experience, and his forearms bore the ceremonial scars of a warrior who had led successful campaigns across the galaxy. "My Empress, their fleet is substantial. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that these humans are more dangerous than we initially believed." Vellana's black eyes turned toward him, and for a moment the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. "Consider what, General? Negotiating with beasts who crawled from their mudball world barely 2 centuries ago? These creatures were still beating each other with sticks when my great-grandmother was conquering the spiral arm." She moved to the central viewing screen, her massive form casting shadows across the gathered council. The screen showed detailed scans of the human fleet, each ship outlined in red to indicate potential threat levels. 200 supercarriers hung in space like metal monsters, their weapon systems powered and ready for combat. "Look at them," Vellana continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They think their crude metal ships can match the bio-neural technology of the Eternal Empire. They think their primitive weapons can penetrate our quantum shields. They think their disconnected minds can outfight our perfect coordination." She turned back to face the War Council, her crystal skin now shifting from red to deep purple. "They are wrong about everything, and I will prove it by turning their fleet into debris that will orbit this world for the next 1,000 years. General Kex exchanged glances with Admiral Zix, the fleet commander whose silver skin markings indicated her specialization in space warfare. Neither of them dared to voice their concerns, but the neural link between them carried their shared worry. The human fleet was larger than any force they had faced in recent memory, and the intelligence report suggested that human technology had advanced significantly since their first contact. "My Empress," Admiral Zix said carefully, "the humans have deployed their entire remaining fleet. This represents nearly everything they have left after our previous engagements. If they are willing to commit such resources, perhaps they believe they have a chance of victory." Vellana's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Let them believe what they want. Belief does not change reality, and the reality is that no species in this galaxy can match the power of the Eternal Empire. We have conquered worlds while they were still learning to make fire. We have mastered technologies they cannot even comprehend." She walked to the massive war throne at the center of the chamber, its living metal surface pulsing with neural interfaces that connected to every ship in the Zephyrian fleet. The throne had been grown rather than built, its biomechanical systems designed to amplify her consciousness and allow her to control thousands of ships simultaneously. "Activate the hive mind." "Protocol," she commanded, her voice now carrying the authority of absolute power. "Every Zephyrian ship, every warrior, every citizen will fight as one. We will show these upstart humans what happens when primitive species challenge a true galactic power. The War Throne's tendrils extended toward her like living serpents, their biomechanical surfaces gleaming with neural connectors. As they attached to her skull and spine, Velana felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her physical form. Suddenly she could see through the eyes of every Zephyrian in the system, feel their thoughts, control their actions. Through the sensors of her flagship, she watched the human fleet preparing for battle. Through the minds of her pilots, she felt their readiness for combat. Through the neural networks of her planetary defense systems, she sensed the massive energy weapons powering up deep beneath the planet's surface. "Today," she said, her voice now echoing from every Zephyrian throat across the system, "we teach the galaxy that the Eternal Empire bows to no one. Today we show these mammals what 3 centuries of evolution beyond their level looks like." The connection with her fleet was intoxicating. She could feel the loyalty of every soldier, the eagerness of every pilot, the anticipation of every gunner. Their minds were linked to hers in perfect harmony, creating a military force that moved and thought as one entity. No human commander could match this level of coordination. No human strategy could overcome the advantage of shared consciousness on the viewing screens. She watched the human ships beginning to move into attack formations. Their movements were clumsy compared to the perfect synchronization of her own fleet. Their communications slow and inefficient compared to the instant mental links between Zephyrian ships. They were about to learn why the Eternal Empire had never lost a major battle. "General Kex," she said, her voice carrying through both sound and neural link simultaneously, "deploy the 1st through 5th battle groups. Show them our standard attack pattern. Let them see what organized military force looks like." "Yes, my Empress," Kex replied, his own consciousness now partially merged with hers. "Should we attempt to disable their ships for study or destroy them completely?" Velana considered this for a moment, watching the human fleet through 1,000 different sensors. "Destroy them," she decided, "but leave one ship intact. I want their admiral brought before me alive. He showed remarkable courage in threatening me directly, and I want to look into his eyes when I explain exactly how inferior his species really is." Through the neural link, she felt the acknowledgement of her commanders across the fleet. Orders flowed instantly from her mind to theirs, coordinating the movements of over 3,000 ships with perfect precision. The human fleet would face an enemy that could react faster than they could think, coordinate better than they could dream, and fight with the accumulated experience of centuries. "My Empress," Admiral Zix reported through the mental link, "the humans are charging their weapons. They appear to be preparing for a full assault." "Let them come," Velana replied, her consciousness now spread across every ship in her fleet. "Let them see what happens when insects try to fight gods." The massive Zephyrian fleet began to move, their crystalline ships catching the light of the twin suns as they accelerated toward the human formation. Each vessel was a work of art and engineering, grown from living crystal and enhanced with bio-neural technology that allowed them to adapt and evolve during combat. Through her expanded consciousness, Velana could feel the excitement of her warriors as they prepared for battle. Some had fought humans before during the colonial raids, but none had faced such a large human fleet. They were eager to prove their superiority, to show these primitive mammals why the Eternal Empire ruled this section of the galaxy. "All ships," she commanded through the neural link, "engage the enemy. Show them no mercy. Give them no quarter. Today we write the final chapter of humanity's brief and pathetic existence among the stars." The response from her fleet was immediate and overwhelming. 3,000 Zephyrian voices answered as one, their battle cry echoing through space itself. The war had begun, and Empress Velana was certain that within hours, the threat of human expansion would be eliminated forever. But as she watched the human fleet hold its position, refusing to retreat despite being outnumbered 15-1, she felt something she had not experienced in decades. It was small, barely noticeable through the flood of sensations from her connected fleet, but it was there nonetheless. For the first time in 3 centuries, Empress Valana the Eternal felt a tiny flicker of doubt. Aboard the UES Defiance, Communications Officer Danny Price watched his screens with growing concern as the Zephyrian fleet began to move. The alien ships were coordinating their movements with a precision that seemed impossible, each vessel perfectly synchronized with thousands of others. "Admiral, they're coordinating on quantum frequencies," he reported, his voice tight with worry. "It's like they're all thinking as one mind?" Admiral Jake Morrison studied the tactical display where thousands of crystalline vessels were forming. Intricate attack patterns that would have taken human ships hours to coordinate. The Zephyrian fleet moved like a living organism, each ship knowing exactly where every other ship would be at any given moment. "Hive mind capabilities," he said grimly. "Intel warned us about this, but seeing it in action is something else entirely." Captain Lisa Bennett approached from the communications station, her expression troubled. "Sir, shouldn't we be more concerned about diplomacy? The Galactic Council specifically requested we attempt peaceful resolution before resorting to military action." They sent 3 separate messages emphasizing the importance of avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Jake turned to face her, his eyes hard with memories of the colonial massacres. "The Council wasn't there when the Zephyrians glassed New Austin, Captain. They didn't see the children's playgrounds turn to radioactive craters. They didn't have to identify bodies that were so burned they could only be recognized by their dental records." He moved to the main viewing screen, which showed the approaching alien fleet in all its terrifying beauty. Each Zephyrian ship was a masterpiece of bioengineering, their crystalline hulls shifting colors as they communicated with each other through methods human science barely understood. "Sometimes, Captain, peace can only be achieved through strength." The Empress made her position clear when she ordered the murder of 3 million innocent people. Dr. Helen Carter, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, approached with her tablet computer clutched tightly in her hands. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced by obvious excitement and fear. "Admiral, I've been analyzing their communication patterns during the last exchange. The Empress isn't just commanding the fleet through normal military channels. She's literally controlling every individual consciousness in her entire military force." Jake frowned, turning his attention to the scientist. "Explain that in terms a soldier can understand, Doctor." Helen pulled up a complex diagram on her tablet, showing wave patterns that resembled brain activity. "Think of it like this, Admiral. In a normal military, each soldier receives orders and then decides how to carry them out. They might interpret those orders differently or make mistakes, but the Zephyrians don't work that way at all." She gestured toward the alien fleet on the main screen. "Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer in that entire fleet is connected to the Empress through quantum-entangled neural networks. She can see through their eyes, think through their minds, and control their actions directly. It's like having 3 million perfectly coordinated body parts instead of 3 million separate people." The implications hit Jake immediately. "Which means their response time is instantaneous. No communication delays, no misunderstood orders, no human error." "Exactly," Helen confirmed. "But there's more. This level of neural integration is unprecedented. In our experience, the Empress isn't just sharing information with her forces. She's literally become them. Their individual personalities are suppressed, replaced by her will and her consciousness." Jake nodded thoughtfully, his mind already working through the tactical implications. "Which means if we can disrupt their hive-mind connection, we can cripple their entire fleet." "Do we have the capability to do something like that?" Helen hesitated before answering. "The new neural disruptors we developed after the Proxima incident might work, but they were designed for individual targets, not network-wide disruption. We'd need to get close enough to their command ship to deploy them directly into their primary neural hub." "How close?" Jake asked. "Close enough to dock with their flagship," Helen replied. "The quantum interference required to disrupt their neural network has a very limited range. We'd essentially need to perform a boarding action on the Empress's personal command vessel." On the main screen, the Zephyrian fleet continued its approach. now close enough that individual details could be seen on their crystalline hulls. Energy weapons were charging along their surfaces, creating patterns of light that pulsed in perfect synchronization. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, like watching a galaxy-sized predator prepare to strike. "Sir," Danny announced. From his station, "We're receiving another transmission from the Empress, audio and visual." "Put it through," Jake ordered. The screen changed to show Empress Valana in her throne room, but now she looked different. The neural interfaces from her war throne had connected to her skull and spine, creating a web of biomechanical links that pulsed with the same rhythm as her fleet's energy weapons. Her eyes had taken on an eerie quality, as if she were looking through thousands of different viewpoints simultaneously. "Admiral Morrison," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources. "I offer you one final chance to withdraw your fleet and accept your species' proper place in the galactic order. Surrender now, and I will grant you a quick death instead of the slow torture you have earned." Jake stepped forward, making sure she could see his face clearly. "Your Majesty, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't come here to surrender. We came here to collect a debt." Valana's crystalline features twisted into what might have been a smile. "A debt? What could primitive mammals possibly believe I owe them?" 3,000,000 lives, Jake replied calmly. "Plus interest, which we calculate at about 200 supercarriers, worth of justice." The Empress's laugh resonated through the bioacoustic systems of her throne room. "You think your crude metal ships can match the bioneural technology of the Eternal Empire? You think your disconnected minds can outfight perfect coordination? Watch and learn, Admiral. Today you discover why 17 star systems bow before my throne." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing the mix of fear and determination in their faces. They were about to face an enemy that had conquered most of this galactic sector, led by an alien intelligence that could control thousands of ships with perfect precision. "All ships," Jake announced over the fleet communication system, "this is Admiral Morrison. In 30 minutes, we will engage the Zephyrian fleet. Today we face an enemy that thinks coordination and superior technology guarantee victory. They're about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose." Lieutenant Commander Ryan Phillips, leader of Phoenix Squadron, responded over the COM system. "Admiral, our fighter pilots are ready. We've studied the Zephyria ship designs and identified potential weak points in their crystal hulls." "Good," Jake replied. "Remember, people, we're not just fighting for revenge. We're fighting for the future of humanity in this galaxy. Show them that we don't bow to tyrants, no matter how ancient or powerful they claim to be." Throughout the massive fleet, 2,000,000 human voices began to respond. Some shouted battle cries, others whispered prayers, but all of them shared the same determination. They had come too far to back down now, traveled too many light years to accept defeat without a fight. Dr. Carter approached Jake one final time, her expression serious. "Admiral, there's something else about their neural network that concerns me. The level of integration we're seeing isn't just military coordination. The Empress has essentially absorbed the personalities of her entire fleet into her own consciousness." "What does that mean for us?" Jake asked. "It means she's not just commanding them," Helen explained. "She's become them. If we disrupt that connection suddenly, the psychological shock could be devastating. We might not just be defeating their fleet. We might be destroying their ability to function as individuals." Jake considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "They made their choice when they attacked our colonies, Doctor. Every action has consequences, and today the Empress learns what happens when you underestimate humanity." The Zephyrian fleet was now close enough that their energy weapons were beginning to target human ships. The space between the two fleets crackled with the tension of impending battle, and Jake knew that within minutes the largest space battle in human history would begin. "All ships, prepare for combat," he ordered. "Today we show the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender, and we don't forget." The space around Zephyria Prime erupted into chaos as both fleets opened fire simultaneously. Human supercarriers launched wave after wave of fighters while unleashing devastating broadside attacks from their massive railguns, the Zephyrian. Vessels responded with crystalline energy beams that could slice through a ship's hull like a hot knife through butter. The silence of space was broken by the flash of explosions, and the deadly dance of two civilizations locked in mortal combat. Commander Ryan Phillips piloted his fighter through the battle, leading Phoenix Squadron in a desperate assault on a Zephyrian dreadnought. The enemy ship was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, its crystal hull shifting colors as it communicated with the rest of the fleet. Energy beams lanced out from its weapon ports, turning space around Ryan into a deadly light show. "This is Phoenix leader. We're taking heavy fire," he reported over the comm system, pulling his fighter into a sharp dive to avoid a beam that would have vaporized him instantly. "These crystal ships are tougher than our simulations predicted. Their hulls are adapting to our weapons." Behind him, Phoenix 3 exploded in a ball of superheated plasma as a Zephyrian beam found its mark. Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed, his fighter harder, weaving through the enemy fire with skill born from years of training. "Phoenix Squadron, concentrate fire on their weapon ports. If we can't punch through their hulls, we'll disable their guns." The space around him filled with brilliant explosions as both sides traded devastating blows. Human destroyers worked in coordinated packs, their advanced computer systems calculating firing solutions faster than human minds could process. But the Zephyrian hive mind allowed for perfect coordination that no computer could match, their ships moving like parts of a single organism aboard the UES Defiance. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the tactical display with growing concern. The battle was not going as planned. Human ships were fighting with courage and skill, but the enemy's perfect coordination was allowing them to anticipate every human move before it happened. "Status report," Jake demanded, his voice cutting through the noise of battle stations. "Captain." Lisa Bennett looked up from her console, her face grim. "We've lost 17 carriers, sir." The Vigilant took a direct hit to her reactor core and went down with all hands. The Liberty is venting atmosphere and has lost main power. The Zephyrians are adapting to our tactics in real time. Jake's jaw tightened as he watched another human ship disappear in a flash of light. Each explosion represented thousands of lives lost, thousands of families that would never see their loved ones return home. But he had expected heavy casualties. The Zephyrian Empire had not conquered 17 star systems by being weak or unprepared. Their hive mind is learning from every encounter, Dr. Helen Carter reported from her science station. "Every time we try a new attack pattern, they share the information instantly across their entire fleet. It's like fighting an enemy that knows our moves before we make them." The main screen showed the Zephyrian fleet moving with impossible precision. Their crystalline ships weaving through the human formation like schools of deadly fish. Every movement was calculated, every shot placed with mathematical accuracy. The human fleet, despite its size and firepower, was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that could think and react as one mind. "Then we need to cut off the head of the snake," Jake decided. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Empress's flagship. Clear us a path to the command vessel. If we can reach their leader, we can end this." The massive human fleet began to converge, their combined firepower creating a corridor of destruction through the Zephyrian lines. Railgun rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed smashed into crystal hulls, while missile salvos lit up the darkness with nuclear fire. For a few moments, it seemed like the human assault might break through, but for every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The Zephyrian fleet was enormous, numbering in the thousands, and their perfect coordination allowed them to replace losses instantly. Ships that had been guarding the outer system suddenly appeared in the main battle zone, their movements coordinated with split-second timing. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Empress herself," Communications Officer Danny Price announced, his voice tense with strain. The main screen flickered and changed to show Empress Valana in her throne room. But now she looked different, more terrible than before. The neural interfaces connecting her to the war throne pulsed with angry red light, and her crystal skin had taken on a deep purple hue that spoke of barely controlled rage. "You fight well for primitives," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull itself. "Your courage is almost admirable, but this ends now. You have seen only a fraction of the Eternal Empire's true power. Witness what happens when you force me to take this conflict seriously." Behind her, massive biomechanical constructs began to emerge from the planet's surface. They were planetary defense cannons the size of skyscrapers, their crystalline forms pulsing with enough energy to shatter moons. Jake had seen weapons like these in intelligence reports, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Jake ordered, but he knew it was already too late. The planetary defense cannons were already tracking human vessels, their massive forms turning with ponderous grace to aim at the fleet. The cannons fired simultaneously, their combined energy beams lancing through space toward the human fleet like the wrath of angry gods. The U's Vigilant, a supercarrier with 8,000 crew members, took a direct hit and disintegrated in a ball of plasma that briefly outshone the system's twin suns. "Shields failing across the fleet," Captain Bennett shouted over the chaos, as the ship shook from a near miss. "We can't withstand this level of firepower. Those planetary cannons are beyond anything in our weapons database." Jake watched as 3 more supercarriers died under the alien bombardment, their hulls vaporized by energy beams that seemed to tear holes in space itself. The human fleet was being systematically destroyed by weapons that belonged in nightmares rather than reality, but Jake had been prepared for this moment. He had studied every available report on Zephyrian technology, analyzed every captured weapon and piece of equipment. He had known from the beginning that conventional tactics would not be enough to defeat an enemy this advanced. "Dr. Carter," he called out over the noise of battle, "deploy the neural disruptors. Target the Empress's flagship directly." Hidden within the Defiance's hull, experimental neural disruptor arrays activated for the first time in actual combat. The technology was based on research from the Proxima incident, where human scientists had first encountered alien neural networks. The disruptors generated waves of quantum interference designed to disrupt the delicate neural connections that allowed the hive mind to function. Invisible beams of disruption washed over the Zephyrian command ship, penetrating its crystal hull and reaching the bio-neural networks within. The effect was not immediately visible, but throughout the Zephyrian fleet, pilots began to experience something they had never felt before in their lives. Confusion. For the first time in centuries, individual Zephyrian minds began to separate from the collective consciousness that had defined their existence. Pilots who had never made an independent decision suddenly found themselves alone in their own thoughts. Gunners who had always known exactly where to aim their weapons suddenly had to rely on their own judgment. The perfect coordination that had made the Zephyrian fleet so deadly began to break down as thousands of minds struggled to function independently. Ships that had moved with clockwork precision began to drift out of formation as their pilots tried to remember how to think for themselves. "It's working," Dr. Carter reported, excitement and fear mixing in her voice. "The neural network is destabilizing. But Admiral, the disruption is more extensive than we anticipated. We're not just breaking their military coordination. We're severing neural connections that have existed for generations." Jake watched as the enemy fleet began to fall apart, their ships moving erratically as confused pilots tried to understand what was happening to them. It was working, but at what cost? He pushed the thought aside. The Zephyrians had made their choice when they attacked human colonies. "All ships, press the attack," he commanded. "They're vulnerable. Hit them now, while they're disorganized." The human fleet surged forward with renewed hope, their weapons finding targets among the confused Zephyrian ships. The tide of battle was turning, but Jake knew the real test was yet to come. Somewhere in that crystalline palace, Empress Valana was experiencing the most terrifying thing imaginable for a being who had shared consciousness for 3 centuries. She was learning what it meant to be alone. The planetary defense cannons fired again, their energy beams cutting through space like swords of pure destruction. The UES Liberty, already damaged from earlier attacks, took a glancing blow that tore through her port side and sent debris spinning into the void. Captain Amy Foster watched helplessly as her ship's hull began to buckle under the impossible forces being unleashed against the human fleet. "Emergency power to forward shields," she ordered, knowing it would make little difference against weapons. That could crack planets. All hands prepare for impact. The next salvo from the planetary cannons was even more devastating than the first. 3 supercarriers died in brilliant flashes of light, their crews vaporized before they could even scream. The human fleet was being systematically destroyed by firepower. That seemed to violate the laws of physics themselves. But even as human ships died around him, Admiral Jake Morrison watched his tactical display with growing hope. The neural disruptors were working better than anyone had dared imagine. Throughout the Zephyrian fleet, ships were beginning to drift out of formation as their pilots struggled with the alien concept of independent thought. "The disruption is spreading through their entire network," Dr. Helen Carter reported, her voice filled with amazement and horror. "It's like watching a single organism tear itself apart. The individual consciousness that we take for granted is completely foreign to them." Deep within her crystalline palace, Empress Valana felt the neural disruption like a physical blow to her mind. The thousands of consciousness that had been connected to hers for so long began to flicker and fade, like dying stars. The perfect unity that had defined her existence for 3 centuries was crumbling, leaving her alone in ways she had never imagined possible. "No!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the bioacoustic walls of the throne room. "I am eternal. I am the mind that guides 17 star systems. I cannot be severed from my people." But the quantum interference from the human disruptors was too strong. One by one, the neural links that connected her to her fleet began to snap like overstressed cables. The sensation was indescribable, like losing parts of her own body, like watching pieces of her soul disappear into darkness. General Kex and Admiral Zix stood frozen in the throne room, their own minds struggling to process the concept of individual thought. For decades they had existed as extensions of the Empress's will, their personalities subsumed into her greater consciousness. Now they were being forced to remember who they had been before the neural integration. "My Empress," General Kex said, his voice uncertain and confused. "I can no longer feel your thoughts in my mind. The connection is breaking down. What are your orders?" Valana turned toward him, her crystal skin flickering between different colors as she fought to maintain control. "The humans," she gasped, the words coming out in broken fragments. "They have done something to the neural network. They have severed the connections that bind us together." Through the viewing screens, she could see her fleet falling into chaos. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination were now colliding with each other as confused pilots tried to remember how to operate independently. The magnificent war machine that had conquered 17 star systems was tearing itself apart. "Repair the connections," she ordered desperately. "Restore the neural links. I cannot rule without them. I cannot exist without them." But her technicians were as confused as everyone else, their expertise dependent on shared knowledge that was no longer accessible. The bio-neural networks that had taken centuries to develop were failing faster than they could be repaired. Aboard the U's Defiance, Jake watched as the Zephyrian fleet began to collapse. Ships were spinning out of control as their pilots experienced panic attacks brought on by the terrifying isolation of individual consciousness. Some vessels were firing randomly, their gunners unable to coordinate with anyone else. Others had simply stopped moving altogether, their crews paralyzed by confusion. "All ships begin boarding operations," Jake ordered. "Target the Empress's flagship. We end this now." Captain Amy Foster led the first boarding party, her Marines equipped with the latest in combat armor and weapons. They blasted through the crystalline hull of the enemy flagship and fought their way through corridors filled with confused Zephyrian defenders who could barely remember how to coordinate their movements. The palace guards who had once moved with perfect synchronization, now stumbled around like drunken children. Some fired their weapons wildly, hitting their own allies as often as they hit the attacking humans. Others simply stood motionless, overwhelmed by the sensation of being alone in their own minds for the first time in their lives. Foster and her team reached the throne room to find Empress Valana collapsed beside her war throne. The neural interfaces that had once connected her to her empire now hanging loose and sparking with damaged bioelectricity. The mighty ruler who had conquered star systems was curled up on the floor like a frightened child. "You," Valana whispered when she saw the humans enter her sanctum. "You severed the link. For 3 centuries I have been connected to every mind. In my empire, now I am alone and I cannot bear this isolation." Jake Morrison entered the throne room behind the boarding party, his weapon lowered but ready. He looked down at the broken Empress, seeing not a galaxy-conquering tyrant but a being who had never learned to exist as an individual. "Now you know how it feels to be human, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "We've always been alone in our own minds, and we've survived just fine. In fact, that independence is what makes us strong." Valana looked up at him with eyes that held genuine terror. "How do you bear it? How do you function when you cannot share thoughts with others? How do you make decisions when you have only your own mind to guide you?" "Practice," Jake replied. 3 billion years of evolution taught us to think for ourselves. Every human child learns to be independent. Every human adult makes their own choices. That's what you never understood about us." Around the throne room, Zephyrian soldiers were laying down their weapons, too confused and frightened to continue fighting. The neural disruption had not just broken their military coordination, it had shattered their entire way of life, forcing them to confront the reality of individual existence. "I surrender," Valana said, her voice barely a whisper. "I cannot rule when I cannot connect to my people. I cannot lead when I cannot share their thoughts." "Take your victory, Admiral Morrison. You have destroyed everything that made me who I was." Jake looked around the throne room, seeing the fear and confusion in every Zephyrian face. These beings had lived their entire lives as part of a collective consciousness, never knowing the loneliness and responsibility that came with individual thought. The neural disruption had not just defeated their military, it had forced them to become something they had never been before. Individuals. "The war is over," Jake announced over the fleet communication system. "The Empress has surrendered and her fleet is standing down. We've won." But as he looked down at Valana, still curled up beside her broken throne, Jake wondered if victory was the right word. The humans had not just defeated the Zephyrian Empire. They had fundamentally changed what it meant to be Zephyrian, forcing an entire species to abandon their collective consciousness and learn to exist as individuals. Throughout the system, Zephyrian ships drifted helplessly as their crews struggled with concepts that humans took for granted. The idea of making decisions without consulting others, of bearing responsibility for their own actions, of existing in the terrifying isolation of individual consciousness was almost too much for them to comprehend. "What happens now?" Valana asked, looking up at Jake with eyes that held the vulnerability of a being learning to be alone for the first time. "Now you learn," Jake replied. "You learn what every human child learns, how to think for yourself, how to make your own choices, how to take responsibility for your own actions. It won't be easy, but it's the only way forward." As word of the surrender spread across the galaxy, other species began to look at humanity with a mixture of respect and fear. The humans had not just defeated one of the most powerful empires in known space. They had done something that many considered impossible. They had forced a hive mind species to become individuals, the 200 supercarriers that had entered orbit as instruments of war now became symbols of a new era in galactic politics. Humanity had proven that individual consciousness could triumph over collective tyranny, that a species fighting for their own survival could overcome even the most advanced alien technology, but perhaps most importantly, they had shown that sometimes the greatest victory was not in destroying your enemy, but in forcing them to discover who they really were when they could no longer hide behind the safety of shared consciousness. The Zephyrian Empire was dead, but the Zephyrian people were finally free to become themselves.